Well, we want to see more of that handshake. Yes, we really do. Because following the tragic attacks in Delta, resulting in the loss of 16 soldiers and the tragic deaths of 40 civilians, so many people have called on the authorities to appropriately and promptly address the deteriorating civil-military relations in various parts of the country. So let's just go straight into the conversation this morning. We have with us Ademola Abbas, who is a professor of international law. He's also a global security expert. He joins us here in the studio. Thanks for joining us this morning.
My pleasure.
We also have joining us from Bonn in Germany, Dr. Oyewole Ogini, Doctor of Political Sociology. He is specialized in armed conflicts and civil-military interaction, state-society interaction in violent environments. He is also a senior researcher with Bonn International Center for Conflict Studies. Thank you for joining us this morning, Doctor.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, well, let me begin with you, Prof. A lot has been said about the occurrences in Delta and a number of other communities previously. There are those who cite Baramatu, those who cite in a number of other places before this one. One of the points the president made is that the military is not just another organization. The military is a symbol of state, representing about 200 million people on the surface of the earth in a geographical location called Nigeria. And how significant is that perspective for you?
Oh, thank you, Ayo. Thanks for having me, and Alera as well. It's a good reminder from Mr. President of what the institution of the military is in Nigeria, if anybody has forgotten, that in fact it represents all Nigerians, and it's not only the military, police, and the other armed forces, the Navy, the, Air Force, and DSS, whatever you have, anybody that has the power to use force, legal power in the country, comes within that particular bracket. Although we use the word military constantly, but we're talking about armed forces in general. So it's a good reminder, what the president has said, about how far then we want to take that in terms of the responsibility of the military itself to the civilian populace. And the responsibility of the civilian populace to the military is a different question, which I'm sure we are going to have time to go into.
Let me take your opening comments on that as well, Dr. Ogini. What's your take on the president's position about the fact that soldiers were killed in such a way as it happened?
Yeah, thank you very much. Again, I think I agree with what Professor Abbas said. I think the aspect of military as an institution itself, actually, it's a part of democratic norms, and it also should be considered as such. So sometimes, yeah, of course, their role also have to be limited to the extent to which they're supposed to be engaged. But at the same time, they can also serve a complementary, this sort of function in such a situation as what happened with reference to what President said. So the military itself is to sustain democracy and is to work also in unison with other democratic actors within the governance system.
Just to be clear, what you just mentioned now, you said that the military has a primary responsibility, but then they can also be called for other ancillary services. That's what you just said now?
Yes.
Okay. In this case that we're talking about, is that what you think happened? Is there a different rule of engagement for when they are on their primary assignment as opposed to this one?
Yeah, it depends on the level of threat. Of course, as you know, that the military itself, if the situation in our country is a bit better, supposed to only function to tackle external threats. So with respect to what happened, three things have to be factored in. The first thing we have to think about, for example, how much is the level of state presence in this area of operation, in the operational environment. If the state presence is limited, then the activities of the military sometimes have to reflect this, which means we have to look at who is the gatekeeper here. Over the years, has there been responsible government presence in this area, or is it other actors like a traditional chief or non-state actors that have been predominant there? This will determine the extent to which the military can actually engage in that area that will not resort to casualties. Of course, there are also issues about the awareness of the local community of this operation. So this is one point. The third point I would want to mention is that, of course, police supposed to be the first point of action or call when we refer to activities that have to do with significant threat at the local level. So this quite have to be dissected properly.
Well, Professor, this whole incident has made people actually ask the question, what is the core function of the military? Were they acting, were their actions part of the core functions that the army is supposed to carry out in a nation?
Well, thank you very much, Alera. That's a very vital question, because the primary function of the military is to protect the territorial integrity of the country, which means it's a responsibility that is aggressive in nature. That is, it moves towards outside the country, not from within.
Yes, so they're protecting against
outside external aggression. Aggression, basically. Yeah. And that is why you have the police to serve internal. That's in protecting internally. Mm-hmm. Nowadays you have the civil defense. You have the Navy that protect the territorial waters, sometimes could be within the country itself, and so many others. So the primary function of the military is to secure the territorial border. Be that as it may, it does not then mean that when a need actually arises,
you cannot call them.
You can call them. If you look at other countries, developed democracies like in the US, during the insurrection of January 6, 2020, as an example, you have different the responsibilities are graduated. You call on this level, maybe the police. If the police cannot do it, you call on the next level, the National Guard and this and that, before it comes to the military. I think the only time you use the military outside their original function should be when there is a massive natural disaster like earthquakes. As an example, when you see like in Turkey a few years ago and some other countries, in which the regular forces such as the police could be overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of what has happened, then you can call on the military to be able to help in that. But what has happened in Nigeria is that we have cheapened completely, we have completely communalized and criminalized the role of the military to the sense that they have become 2 for 10 kobbos today, to be blunt about it. And that began long ago. Number one, the military shouldn't have the barracks within inner cities in the country, basically. And that could seem to be contradictory to what we are going to talk about later in terms of relationship, but no. Militaries stay in the barracks. The barracks are, there should be
a
remote, and there should be a regulated contact with the civilian populace. I am not asking for them to be developed away from the people, but they should develop within the people's norm, but in a way that is very supervised and regulated.
But Professor, if you also recall that we had military rule for several decades, and we were used to walking side by side soldiers on the road, they were our paddies and we slapped them on the back.
That is very, I'm happy you bringing that on. Because that, again, is one of the things we have to look at in terms of the civil military, or what I would rather call civil armed forces relations that we have in the country. It's okay for us to have, to have that kind of relationship, because one of the problems we have in Nigeria so far is the fact that there has not been a deliberate subjecting the military to democratic control. That's what you call democratic control of the armed forces. It's very important. As you said, Nigeria was governed by the armed forces for a long time, for 4 decades or thereabout. You do not expect people who have governed you through the use of decrees, through the use of naked power, arms and ammunitions, who have backed orders at you, and suddenly, because now you have gone to the ballots and you have voted some people into the government, who, by the way, sometimes are very, very indisciplined themselves, and then you want that the military to automatically then subject itself to democratic control. It doesn't work like that. Let me take you back a bit. 1787 was the American Constitution. There are provisions in that constitution, almost 300 years old, for a deliberate relationship between the military and the civilian populace. Go to Poland, 1997. The same thing happened in Poland. Countries take steps deliberate steps to regulate the relationship between the military and the civilians. But what do we have in Nigeria? We don't. Because our military from 1960, I mean, we were only lucky from 60 to 66. By the way, from January 1556, that you had really a very professional army in Nigeria. That was when the first coup happened. But what happened on July of that year, a counter coup, don't forget, had a massive political coloration in which one sect of the country thought that the coup was carried out by a particular sect because those who were killed happened to be more from the other sect. So the counter coup actually had a political coloration. From that point of view, the Nigerian military became totally politicized. But we did not deal with it. We swept it, like many other things in our national life, by the way, under the carpet, hoping that one day that same military that has become so bastardized and so brutalized and so ethnicized and politicized will then wake up one day and be a 21st century compliant military. It doesn't work like that. So we've missed that opportunity of using our constitution to regulate the relationship between the civilian and the military. So what do you have? Take a step back. In this country, the military, I mean, if you want to talk about the kind of the interface, the tension, it is personal, it is institutional, it is public, and it is private. Take the personal. Have you ever tried to overtake a military convoy on the motor highway in Nigeria before?
Wouldn't dare.
You wouldn't dare to do it. Because there is that fear that they use naked power, they use naked gun, and they're pointing their gun at you on the highway.
Well, I have.
Well, yes, I mean, good luck to you. I wouldn't dare.
The reason I said I have is because sometimes, perhaps it also speaks to some things that a number of people have said. Sometimes we don't challenge the laws. We don't even challenge our own authority. I have been on the highway, and I agree with you.
How can you challenge when there's a gun pointed at you?
I'm coming somewhere. I'm not talking about confronting them physically. Look, challenge the process. I agree with you. There was a day I was driving, I wanted to overtake, and they were telling me not to overtake by getting in my way.
Precisely.
But there have been several other times, that I overtook without any qualms whatsoever. So sometimes these things about the individuals, and I do get the point that you're making. But Dr. Ogini, it's about this relationship with our authorities that we're talking about here. And what happened in Okwama is very, 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 very concerning to a number of people. It is concerning to us in this studio, and that's why we're having this conversation. Now, when we spoke with a retired military officer, a retired Major General, he said there was a lacuna in the space of communication, engagement of the communities by the authorities. They didn't particularly say the military, just by the authorities. There has been some kind of lacuna in our engagement of the people in the various communities. And the governor of the state has also come out to say, you guys, behave yourselves, or I'm going to have to come for you. What in your opinion is missing in that communication space?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think yesterday we published on jihadi banditry and the new strategy in the Lake Chad Basin, which I authored. Basically, what we are speaking about there is also more or less of the communication between the military and the community. So it's just spread over across Nigeria, but other areas that are facing insurgency as well. So as I mentioned before, the first thing is the presence of the state. If a community that lack infrastructure, that lack social service, they have high level of unemployed youth, they have not really feel the presence of state or enjoy the democratic dividends, and actually now have a military visiting them, there will be resentment. So why? Because over years, they do not really experience this military presence, and they do not experience the state presence. But they always see other actors, such as community leaders, and also maybe gang, or those who serve as a protection. Some places a vigilante group that does that. So in that manner, the structure is already established, and they tend to listen to who actually control, who give them food on daily basis, who look after them. So when the military step into that space, it's like a strange person actually entering into a village. So it has to really get in consultation with the key stakeholder there. And this now comes to the aspect of the relation on how military as an institution and the state exists. I want to bring to our attention that military are a heterogeneous group of people. So if we are talking about military, we need to talk about different units of military. And of course, this also has a relation to how we have to treat their perception. For example, in places where military have successfully recovered from the armed groups such as Boko Haram, there are places where we reported that they enjoy good relations with the people. But we also have other places, for example, where the military use forces take over the wife or the victim or collect some bribe. So these all play out in different areas. So, but the most important thing to make sure that whenever there's an engagement, the military institution should not go just like more or less we are the superior to actually calm down the situation. They need to recognize the local dynamic in this area. And that way we can then reset the process. I want to mention finally the important step with respect to the military interaction in Nigeria. Until the emergence of Boko Haram, the military has not really considered the relation with the civilian as a very key issue. But by the time the military operation took place in the northeast of Nigeria and a lot of personnel were killed, they recognized the need for local knowledge. And that is how the multinational joint task force and the civilian joint task force emerged. So this process is still not yet institutionalized. It's more or less an ad hoc function. And that is why it has not spread across the country to see how this relation will evolve to tackle essential threats. Thank you.
Prof, there's a difference between respect and fear. I have heard it said in Nigeria many times that the Navy is respected, the Air Force is respected, but the Army is feared. What do you think informed that kind of attitude?
I think that's a very, very poignant observation because it strikes at the core of what we are discussing here, be it military-civilian or armed forces-civilian relationship. We grew up with the image of the Navy being in this dovey white, when you really talk about the officer and the gentleman, I actually think more in terms of the Navy.
The Navy.
And they're very appealing to, young girls.
Have you ever seen anyone with a dirty uniform?
At all. And the Air Force also. But you see, the military comes in a different shape. And why we use fear to distinguish them, obviously, from respect is because of the history that the Nigerian populace especially has had with them. Let's go back into history. In this country, we had the military during the regime of Obasanjo, I think, brutalized Fela Anikulapo Kuti, burnt down Kalakuta Republic. There was impunity, which inimitable Fela sang on the Unknown Soldier episode. In this country, MK Abiola of blessed memory was assaulted by a member of armed forces, I think if I remember very well, the armed forces Air Force officer, in the so-called Mad Dog syndrome in those days, is in this country. In this same country, we had a military contingent that went into OD and leveled that place. So the parameter of militaries in Nigeria is, I won't even say the use, it's the abuse of the instrument of force, of naked power in the people. And that is going to corrode people's mind. It's going to instill fear in them. Unlike other forces that you refer to. And that is very significant. It's also, whenever anything happens that involves the military in Nigeria, note, those who are concerned are already anxious about brutal reprisals from the military, especially. Now, what happened in Okuama? We've seen videos of houses raised. I am not automatically indicting the military. Let me make it clear, because I think the headquarters have been saying they never gave such an order. But we do know that in Nigeria, nobody ever gives that kind of order. In Obasanjo's regime, they said nobody was able to. At the end of the day, it was blamed on an unknown soldier. So we're not cocooned by that. By the way, I'm just giving them a benefit of the doubt. That let's even assume. But the truth is, there is always a reprisal, because the military believe that when you do this to them, you are bloody. That's the language. You are bloody civilians. Now, make no mistake. The annihilation of soldiers in Okuama or anywhere, or any members of the armed forces of Nigeria, is deplorable, is condemnable. Especially the barbaric nature of the murder of those soldiers who were serving us. They were serving the country, whether we like it or not. But again, let us also remind ourselves that there were soldiers, they were brutalized, they were ambushed. The method was bad, but soldiers dying in a war situation, whether they are going to mediate in a peace and that, is not an extraordinary event. That, I mean, they're not schoolboys who are just going to mediate who were killed. They were soldiers. So in a way, they actually died in the cause of their duty.
Whether we my apologies, there are a good number of people who will agree with you on that score, but here were unarmed soldiers.
That's where I'm going to. When you are serving in the United Nations, for instance, peacekeeping forces, even when you are armed, if your mandate from the UN itself is to not use force as a peacekeeper unless you are fired upon, you wouldn't use force, even though you are carrying arms. And we have seen instances in which even our Nigerian soldiers served in the military, in the contingent of the United Nations, and they behaved very well and professionally. Look, Aguiyi Ironsi, our former, the first head of state of this country, military head of state, served, led military UN mission in Congo twice. The very first black, officer to do that. And so we've had history of very professional military. But what I'm saying is that we have allowed our military to degenerate to the point that they've forgotten that they are being paid by the same people they brutalize every single day. Listen, what happened in Okuama, I said, Okuama, is not excusable, it's deplorable. But I'm more worried about the reaction sometimes by our armed forces. So it happened in Nodi, so you went and leveled them. Let me ask you a question. How are we sure that those who are you reprising against are the same people who committed the heinous crime? That's number one. In that reprisal, again, let me repeat, I am not automatically saying that there have been reprisal in Okuama, but we've seen videos of houses raised. And if you are not sure about the Okuama, we are sure about Odi anyway. And we are sure about the Fala, Nicola Kuzis, Kalakuta, and so many others all over the country. What I'm saying in essence is that when the military then responds in that way, it is inexcusable because you are meeting one barbarity with another barbarity. And you cannot do that. You are a professional army. You are professional members of the armed forces.
Okay.
You should be able to take a step back and be able to deal.
How do we begin to manage the relationship of the military and the armed forces with civilians, both that they serve and that they live within? Don't forget that we have quite a number of military installations in Kaduna State in particular. And so they can't be too far away from the people, going by your example. And these are the systems we have all over the nation. There is one right in the heart of Ikeja. How do we manage that relationship so that trust is built and even the people themselves can defend the armed forces, as you put it?
Thanks so much, Ayo. That's a very important question. Number one, I said earlier on that we need to take deliberate legislative measures. We don't have that in our constitutions. Apart from the bland provisions that you shall maintain the territorial integrity, the military is doing much more than that today. You need to subject them to democratic control of the political authorities. It's important. That is number one. We've missed it in the constitution.
Are they not subjected right now?
No, they're not. It's a generic listing in the constitution. What happens at the moment is that the president is the CNC commander-in-chief, only operates through the service chiefs and what have you. But there is no constitutional role. No constitutional powers enumerated. But the other way you can do also is for the House of Assembly, National Assembly, to take deliberate steps to legislate laws. Look, we've seen examples of that in Ukraine, 2003. They made such a law. Even in Sierra Leone, here in Africa, the Sierra Leone Lomé, ratification accord, 1999, it did the same thing to be able to regulate that relationship. Then there is need for a deliberate retraining of our military. I had the opportunities of training the members of NATO, National Atlantic Treaty Organization, the NDC, NATO Defense Academy, in Rome for about 4 years. And one of the big components of that training is to emphasize that the military is nothing but citizens in uniform. After the Second World War, Germany did that. Immediately after the Second World War, Germany promoted the image of the military as citizens in uniform, nothing more than that. So that they were developed within the people, not away from the people. Today in Nigeria, look, just a couple of days ago, not even the military here, what do you call them, the Mopol or whatever they call them, in a departmental store here in Lagos, a friend's wife went to buy something and there was a long queue. And this rascally Mopol officer jumped the queue and just went straight to the till. And unfortunately for him, this woman is one of the bintos. She used to live overseas before and said, look, you can't do this. We are keen to make payment. Yeah. And the guy said, I am a uniform man. Can't you respect me? This and that. He just began to run and began to call this friend's wife names. That you are a prostitute and this and that. For what? For what sake? And she said, you can rant as much as you want. And that's why I agree with you. Sometimes we need to take some principled stance. But that could come at a cost. Don't forget. And not when these goons are with their guns on the highway.
You know, and I'm glad that you mentioned that one, because sometimes it is not the institution, but the individuals. The same thing we say about, some of us are unfortunately making an exception of the governor of Abia State, which is supposed to be the norm. The norm is supposed to be a performing governor. The abnormally is supposed to be a non-performing governor.
Sorry, Ayo, to cut you, is that the governor that signed the bill is it the one that they said?
No pensions for governors anymore. Yes.
Alex Oti. I'm not rejoicing about that because he will do it for 8 years. The person that comes next will just...
Let's celebrate it while it lasts.
I'm saying,
Dr. Ogini, here we are now about this. I'd like you to also speak to that conversation around military or armed forces and civilian relationship. It is important because we have military installations in every state in the Federal Republic of Nigeria. There are certain images that a uniformed armed forces, armed force member portrays in the minds of people, mostly of fear, not of respect. Yeah. How do we begin to reverse that so that we can actually see them, as Professor Abbas said, civilians in uniform?
Yeah, thank you very much. Annually, we produce what we call militarization index in our institute. And the recent militarization index for Nigeria is still not improving, despite the fact that the issue of military interaction actually has become a bit more of topical issue, even within the military training themselves. So I think one important thing I would want to mention is communication. This is very important in the sense that, for example, if there's a casualties, it's important to say, here we have 30 casualties, and the local community can say, yes, it was 30 casualties. So in that way, then you build trust. So the aspect of communication is important, and it should not be done with this perception of superiority. So it has to be a kind of co-creation of a space where the civilian and the military see themselves as equal partner who want to also channel their effort to development of the country.
Dr. Guinea, just 1 second. Yeah. There is this email that came in that you may want to speak to as well, which I think buttresses some of the issues you've raised. It's from Harry Wononu in Abuja, and he says, the lack of trust originates from the very foundation of the practitioners of coercive force in Nigeria. The colonial police and soldiers weren't friendly and represented agents of oppression, intimidation, and subjugation. It's in the hands of the military to reassure the citizens that the gun is to protect the good and sanction the offenders. This they can do by offering more trainings in civilian diplomacy, embarking on more CSR programs and projects, and directly engaging with the people to discuss and dispel their anxieties and fears. Again, the civilians should stop forthwith in corrupting the military and distracting them from their mandates. Do these issues support some of these issues you're raising?
I do agree completely. Actually, because...
Alera is asking a question. Is it the civilians that are corrupting the military, according to the email sent in by Henry?
It's both.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's not just... for example, I was in the Northeast few months ago, and I was interacting with people what happened with the military in the area of operation where counterterrorism take place, and we have quite a very positive response from the people on how the military fought for them and protected them. But in some other places, we also have a record of abuses. In fact, like military sending people, they have errand boys all around who are not even in uniform. boys who are supposed to be in school or in employment who also work with them on the main road, collecting this sort of taxes. So this is not just only about civilian corrupting the military. Military institution itself need to reflect upon how the activities are carried out. For example, election. Do we still need to have military in our election? This is a big question that we need to also reflect on. And who does that? I have been an election observer, international observer for years. On few occasions I've observed military, patronizing or supporting the electoral committee. So it's more or less an institution that we have to define the role, and that's what the Professor Abbas is trying to say. The institution has to be strengthened. For example, if we have a constitution, it's not enough to have a constitution. We have beautiful constitution. We have one of the best maybe in Africa. Of course, it still needs a lot of improvement, but it's how we domesticate this. And accountability, the aspect of accountability can bring back the aspect of trust. If the ministry institutions are accountable and people can see that, yes, these changes is occurring, a lot of people will support.
Okay.
The second point is, for example...
Doctor, we're running out of time and we need to start winding down. Prof, do you think that we will see a time when the military and, the uniformed men and civilians can live together in peace, to a point where the civilians actually do appreciate the work that these men do? Because in agreeing to join the army or the air force or whatever, they are saying, I am prepared to die. They are prepared to pay the ultimate price.
Well, thank you, Alero. Look, at least between 60 and 66, we saw that interaction between the civilian and the military, even though it degenerated eventually. On so many occasions, we saw that. But what we need to do is to take deliberate steps to reorder that relationship. We haven't done that at all. I agree with what Mr. Ogini said. The constitution is not enough, but it must be there in the first place. If you do not have the role set down in black and white, when there's no law, there is no crime or something like that. But, so that needs to be set down. Is very, very important. Okay.
Well, Dr. Ogini,
as well as training, as well.
Dr. Ogini, your final word, please.
I think for me, I look forward to a more engaged military. And of course, we also should remember that our colleagues are civilian. They need to also behave well. Attacking military is not the best way. There's always several means to also show your differences, but doing that it's really not a civilized way of addressing concern. Thank you.
Well, once again, we commiserate with the Nigerian Army and the armed forces of the Federal Republic of Nigeria on the unfortunate incidents that happened in that Delta community. In those Delta communities, it's something that shouldn't have happened, and we cannot deny that it did. Well, and again, also to say that, look, the welfare of our uniformed men, whoever they are, wherever they work, is of utmost importance and of utmost priority. Because as the president, I think it was the president, even the former president said, once you join the military, the Navy or the Air Force, you have definitely signed your death warrant. And we salute your courage, and we are grateful for the work that you do. Dr. Oyewole Ogini is of political sociology in armed conflicts, civil-military interaction, state-society interaction, and violent environments. He's also a senior researcher at Bonn International Center for Conflict Studies. He joined us from Bonn in Germany, as well as Professor Ademola Abbas, international law professor, as well as global security expert. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Sunrise is back in a moment. Do stay with us.